Chapter 15. Time for another favor. I want you to open your mouth as wide as you can. Now grab your tongue between your thumb and pointer finger and hold onto it for a few seconds. Keep holding. You notice how your fingers are getting all wet and slobbery like that? Notice how your tongue is starting to feel dry. How every time you take a breath, your tongue gets a little bit colder. You probably think that's what happens to everybody when they grab their tongue. I bet you think it's no big deal at all that anyone can pitch their tongue like that. Well, Georgie can too. I just thought that you should know that Georgie can do a bunch of stuff, same as you, even dumb stuff like grabbing his tongue. He doesn't do it a lot, but he could if he wanted to. He wouldn't even think twice about it. You can let go of your tongue now. You might want to dry your fingers off before you turn the page, though. As soon as the bell rang the next morning, Mr. Myers collected their reports. Georgie looked at the red folder with their picture on the top hat glued to the front before he handed it in. Finally over. No more Jeannie the Meanie ever again. Tap, tap, tap. Georgie swiveled around. Why don't you hand in our report before we fail already? Jeannie asked him. After Mr. Myers had collected all the reports, he passed out pieces of paper and said that everybody who wanted to be in the play had to write down their name and the president they wanted to be. Mr. Myers said that he would collect all the papers and make his decision before the end of the day. Georgie stared at his piece of paper, long and hard, his pencil poised above it, George Washington. His brain told his hand, write down George Washington, but the pencil wasn't moving. Jeannie poked him in the back. Why aren't you writing anything, donkey breath? She asked him, her head peeking over his shoulder. You do have stage fright. Georgie quickly crumbled up his paper. I do not, he said. Leave me alone. As everyone else's pencils scratched across their papers, Georgie sat with his chin in his hands, his empty piece of paper scrunched into a ball, and watched Andy chew on his pencil at the front of the room. He wondered where Andy would move to in the summer. Would his family find a bigger house in the same neighborhood, or would it be far away? Would Andy switch schools? Georgie wished he could ask him. By the time the class came back from lunch, Mr. Myers had posted the cast of characters for the play. Everyone raced to the wall to read it. Georgie knew he probably shouldn't even look, but he was dying to see who would play George Washington. Finally, he wiggled his way to the front of the crowd. Russ Wilkins. Of course Russ Wilkins was going to be George Washington. Well, at least he wouldn't have to powder his hair. Georgie was turning to go back to his seat when something caught his eye. His name was on the list too, right next to Abraham Lincoln. There had to be some mistake. Georgie pushed his way through his classmates and rushed to Mr. Myers' desk. Mr. Myers, Georgie said, trying not to appear frantic, why did you put me down for Abraham Lincoln? Mr. Myers sat down a stack of papers. Because you signed up for it, he replied. But Georgie stammered, no, I didn't. I don't want, Georgie. Mr. Myers began gesturing with his pencil. There were a lot of kids who wanted that part, but I was so happy when I saw your name. I think this will be really good for you. And I have to say, from what I read in your report at lunch, it seemed really inspired. I know you'll make a fantastic president. But you can't back out now, Georgie. I'll be so disappointed. Georgie shuffled back to his seat. Abraham Lincoln, the tallest president ever? How could Georgie possibly get up in front of a huge room full of people and pretend to be tall? He'd be laughed right off the stage. Jeannie the Meanie caught Georgie's eye just before he slipped into his seat. She smiled, looking meaner than ever. Guess it's a good thing you don't have stage fright, huh? She said. Georgie was going to kill her.